Hi, nice to see everybody. Hope you're enjoying breakfast. I'm Ben Lefebvre. I'm the energy reporter at Politico, mainly covering oil and gas, the Interior Department. And I will be talking to Representative Bob Latta today from Ohio on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So hope this is a informative talk for you all to listen to over coffee, and I think they had egg biscuit out there, looked pretty good. So nice to see you again, Bob.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're going to be talking to Energy Secretary Chris Wright today, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. At the appropriations hearing today, what are you going to be asking him about?
Well, you know, a lot of times you always want to talk about what's happening on the appropriation side in the committee, but you also start talking about what their thought is, because again, as the chair of the committee just was talking about, you know, we have to have a lot more energy in this country. Mm-hmm. And when you're looking at the amount of power that we're looking at just in the near term, it's going to be massive. And if we're going to keep up in the world, because again, as was talked about a little bit earlier about AI, if we're going to win this race with the data centers, we have to have a massive amount of power. And at the same time, there's a problem out there. We're seeing generation being taken offline. Mm-hmm. So I know the big questions today are how are we going to produce this power that we're going to have in this country in the very short term, and then also into the future.
With, you're talking about power coming offline, I guess, how do you square that with the bill removing, benefits or credits for wind and solar and other renewable and, battery technology?
Well, we had a hearing a little over a month ago with all of the RTOs and the ISOs and ERCOT. And there's one question I've asked everybody that's come before us in about the last 4 years. Do we have to have more power produced in this country or less? Everybody's always said we have to have more power produced. But interesting, in this hearing that we had, all of the RTOs and ISOs also said this: we cannot take off any generation we already have. We're talking about probably about 110, 115 gigawatts going offline. And again, this is a lot of our coal-fired plants. At the same time, we need 150 gigawatts coming online. So your numbers aren't adding up. And so if we're going to have to really look at preserving what we have out there. Give you an example. I was at one of our regional transmission companies, and what they say is, we don't care where the power is coming from, we just got to get it in and get it there. So they were starting to monitor, especially with the intermittent power out there, just to get a history, some kind of a history to understand how much power is coming in. So it's the power we're going to have, because again, the big push has been on the data centers, and when we look at the amount of power that they're going to be consuming, it is unbelievable.
Well, that's preserving the, maybe some plants that have been going offline. Maybe they were getting unaffordable. But, how does that translate to getting rid of credits for new plants? We're seeing, solar operators saying, they're going to have to go cancel projects if some of these credits go away in the appropriations bill. Is there a concern that maybe the pendulum has swung too far against renewables after we saw the big build out with Biden's bill?
Well, I go back to what we did in 2008. As Republicans, we came up, we call it our all-of-the-above energy strategy. And part of that all-of-the-above energy strategy was looking at everything that was out there, but also adding at the very end of that, that we're not going to pick the winners and losers. We want to make sure it's the market. But we also know that, the intermittents have a part to play right now, because again, they're putting energy into the grid. But at the same time, when we're talking about on the base load side, as discussed a little bit earlier, when you're thinking about on the nuclear side, especially the large plants, the small modular reactors, they're about 7 to 8 years out on the small modulars. We're looking at, the first time seeing 2 nuclear plants coming online in this country since pretty much the 1970s. Then you look at our oil reserves and our natural gas reserves that we have in this country, that we're leading the world in natural gas production. So it's part of the problem that we have right now in this country is we're producing energy, but we can't get it to where we need to have it. And so I think there's 2 things that we're looking at in the committee right now, in the subcommittee, is that we have to have the power, but at the same time, we've got to have permitting reform in this country.
I'm old enough to remember when permitting reform was talked about a couple of years ago with Senator Joe Manchin, and after I don't know, a Congress and a half, maybe more. There's been no real movement on permitting reform. I mean, kind of what can be done to kind of get something over the line finally on that?
Well, on the permitting side, especially when we're talking about energy, there's jurisdiction questions. First of all, it's the Energy and Commerce Committee, and it's also natural resource. I just saw the chairman last night of Natural Resources, Bruce Westerman. We talked about it again because we want to make sure that we've got permitting moving, because we've got to get it done this Congress, because you just can't keep falling behind. Because, when you think about who your global competitor out there, it's Communist China. They don't worry about permitting reform. They just do it. So we've got to get this thing done and get it done right, because if we don't, we're going to fall farther and farther behind. And it's what good is it producing all this energy and having the energy if we can't get it to where we need to have it?
And then one question I had: the White House has its new Energy Dominance Council. I think we're going to have someone there from appearing on stage later today. Do you talk with anybody on the council, or do they check in with Congress and say, what do you need us to do, or where has the council been in your?
Yeah, right now I've had a lot more conversations with Secretary Wright and Secretary Burgum, and we've had very good conversations. And so just talking with their respective departments, because I think they're both moving in the right direction. But we have a lot of conversations back and forth with different counterparts at the White House, because if we see something, you want to always make sure that this is what we're doing, so nobody's ever caught flat-footed on something. But we want to make sure that, again, we're moving forward on the energy side, because again, unfortunately, I guess I can say I'm old enough to remember the mid-1970s when we were in oil embargoes and couldn't buy gasoline on certain days if your license plate was an even or an odd. Some stations wouldn't sell you gas if you hadn't been a customer there. But you look at today, and that not only are we able to take care of our needs in this country, but we also can help our allies around the world, especially when we come on LNG exports.
With LNG, I'm glad you brought that up. We're seeing, I think it was Bank of America last week and a few other analysts saying that the sheer scale of LNG exports coming online is helping to drive up prices domestically for natural gas. Natural gas, I think, was like around $3.50 an MMBTU now, which is still cheap, but it's higher than it had been. And these banks are saying now, with all the new export capacity coming online this year, we're going to see natural gas prices go up by 25% by the end of 2026. Is there a concern that, we've had the president say one of his, biggest campaign promises was to cut energy prices? Are you concerned at all that this is going to be hard to do with the sheer amount of natural gas we're going to be exporting overseas?
Well, first of all, you have to produce it. If we don't keep the people out in the fields working and bringing up the natural gas, we're not going to have it in this country. And so if we see a scaling back, it's going to hurt actually in this country. I've spoken at different conferences with a lot of folks from Eastern and Central Europe, and they all say the same thing. We don't want to buy Russian gas. We want to buy U.S. natural gas. And first of all, it's a lot cleaner than what the Russians produce. So we want to make sure that we're helping our friends and allies around the world, because again, they all say the same thing. We don't want them to do it either. We don't want them to finance Putin's wars. The other thing is that this is like late last year when the Russians cut off the Austrians. So they want a secure supply out there, and we as in this country can make sure that our friends around the world have that, and so it makes the world more secure when we do that. And so I think that's another important factor. On the question as to how much it might raise the cost, I haven't really, sometimes the analysts are wrong on that, because again, we want to be bringing up more, because years ago when we were told we had no natural gas in this country, literally we were told we had no oil, we had no natural gas, and because of what the ability for us to bring it up today, all of a sudden that we can help ourselves and help our friends.
But oil companies are now saying they're going to be producing less oil and gas because prices are so low. Prices have gone down to they're hovering around $60 a barrel for West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. oil benchmark price. And at that price, they're saying they're going to slow the drills. So is there a concern that if we're not bringing up enough natural gas to offset the amount of exports, people here are going to be seeing, unless prices all of a sudden for oil go up and incentivize the oil producers to produce more natural gas? Is there a concern that, yeah, your natural gas price, your electricity bill is going to go up next year?
Well, there's two things. I get up at 4 something in the morning every day, and there's two things I look at first thing in the morning. I look to see what West Texas is trading at, and also I look at what the 10-year Treasury note is. Those two play a huge part of what we do in this economy. And we have seen, oil going up and down somewhere in the 65, 50, down a little bit, and it's up. So, but they have to have a price out there to be able to bring it up and make sure that they can keep their people working in the fields. Because again, when you go out there, it's absolutely amazing what American technology has done. And so, right now we want to make sure that we're helping people around the world. And the other thing that's important to note is that what our refineries are set up for in this country. When we were told we had no oil in this country, our refineries are set up for heavy crude. And so all of a sudden we have light crude, and so we still have to bring in the heavy crude because our refineries, like some of our refineries in Northwest Ohio, run on heavy. And some can do sweet, but you run into that issue, what your refineries are set. We haven't built any refinery in this country since the mid-1970s.
So the price of oil was around $80 in mid-January. Now it's at 65. What brought that about?
It's a world commodity. It's what's out there. You'll hear OPEC, and this is another important thing. During the first Trump administration, I told people what was one of the names you never heard even mentioned in a newspaper or a news show. OPEC, because all of a sudden the United States was back. And all of a sudden when the United States says we're backing out and we're not going to be producing, what happened, what we saw during the Biden administration, making it tough out there, all of a sudden we heard OPEC again. So, all of a sudden when the United States is strong, we can help the world's markets because of that. And so when you have, some countries out there saying, well, what we're going to do is we're going to either scale back on how many, a million barrels they're going to put out a day, or if they're going to pump more, you'll see maybe a small handful of countries trying to dominate with the world prices. So that's where you get on the commodity side.
And then, as you mentioned, you have refineries in northern Ohio. You got the Husky refinery, a few others. The price of steel has been affected by tariffs. I think there's a 25, 50% tariff on imported steel. How is that affecting refiners in your district?
Well, with anything, you want to make sure, because like Line 5 supplies comes in from Canada.
Yeah, pipeline.
Yes, Line 5, which is Enbridge, and it comes through the Upper Peninsula down through the Lower Peninsula. And it feeds the big Marathon refinery outside in Detroit, and then it comes down and it also feeds refineries in northern Ohio. So for us, if you put the price up on that crude, it's going to affect our prices. And so, when I was at one of our refineries recently in Lima, that they weren't talking about pretty much on the steel question. It's really on the question of what the crude prices are. Yeah.
Well, Canadian crude prices have that tariff too on them, right? Are the tariffs really affecting your district or in Ohio? I mean, you got steel up, you got crude prices up. There's been a kind of an ongoing labor shortage for energy projects. What are you hearing from your constituents who are tied to these projects?
Well, I have a very unique district. I have 86,000 manufacturing jobs, and I also have the largest farm income producing district in the state of Ohio. So if I go from Indiana all the way to the Cleveland suburbs, my district ends in Lorain County. So, I've got large companies, I've got medium, I also have small. I have companies of 10 people that are exporting. And so they're all very, very concerned because of all of a sudden it's something they're getting that they can't get from someplace else is going to drive the cost up. I've got tire manufacturing in Findlay, Ohio. If a certain type of steel that they have to put in the tire is not produced in this country, and then there's a tariff on it, it could end up being that tire that's being produced in this country with that tariff on the steel makes that tire uncompetitive against a product that's actually brought in, made someplace else. So there's concern out there. So we're all looking at when, hopefully these negotiations get completed with the White House that we know exactly what's going to happen on tariffs in the future.
Yeah, you mean if they, I mean, the White House keeps saying there's going to be a deal tomorrow, a deal tomorrow. Are you in touch with them? Like, when is this going to happen? You know, my district needs relief on these prices.
Well, you know, we're in contact. Anytime a company calls me, I call them, you know, call the White House and say, here's a specific situation that's occurring out here in the district. Just wanted to make sure that you all know what this is about this particular industry, and which is really important because, again, we're talking about when you, in my district, we make everything in Ohio. You know, you name it, we make it. But the big thing is that we can't consume it all here in this country. We have to export it. So, you know, where I live, I'm 80 miles from the Windsor, Ontario Bridge.
Yep.
In my home county, at the crossroads of I-75 and the Ohio Turnpike, it's one day's drive to 60% of the United States population from that one point. You go across the Windsor Bridge 80 miles up, you're then one day's drive to 60% of the Canadian population. So, you know, we got to trade back and forth, and so we want to make sure that what we produce we can export.
Yeah. No, I grew up in Detroit, so I'm well familiar with Toledo. Glass, wasn't it glass capital of the world?
Yeah.
We were supposed to be an advanced glass factory there, correct? And I think that project got canceled because they were worried about the funding not coming in that they were promised. Is that?
Well, you know, Toledo is known as the glass capital of the world because you have Libby Owens Ford, Owens, Illinois, Owens Corning Fiberglass. Owens, Illinois' headquarters is actually in my home county, in Northern Wood County. And but you know, again, it's what we produce, and so it's making sure we have the jobs out there because I always say this, and this is the great thing about serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee. When you sit up on the dais, we're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 years because we're talking to the entrepreneurs and the innovators that come before us in committee, and so we always want to make sure we're not getting the laws. Not looking over the horizon, but looking in a rear-view mirror because we're just going to stifle their way of doing things. And, you know, and the great thing about this country is this: I have so many people come in to meet with me that they say we can't do it in our country, but we can do it here in the United States, and we want to make sure that continues. And I just recently spoke to a younger man from the Scandinavian countries that I said, why did you come here to produce what you want to do in energy? He said, this is the country to do it. You just can't do it back in Europe.
Is there concerns that, you know, I know that LNG has been seen as kind of like a big geopolitical tool. It's like it was a you know, diplomatic tool in the tool belt that, you know, administrations like to use when they went to deal with Europe. But is there a fear that the trade tensions that are being stoked right now are kind of making, you know, countries in Europe or in Asia think twice about signing like supply contracts for U.S. LNG or for U.S. oil? I mean, it used to be the line was, well, you know, you don't want to depend on Russia in case they turn off your gas, which they had done, you know, numerous times. But is there a fear now that, well, if we get into a tariff spat with this White House, we don't want to have LNG, or, you know, we don't want to have to like have that tied to an administration that kind of goes back and forth between who's their allies and who's their friends?
You know, I really haven't heard that on that part because, again, what we're producing in this country not only benefits us, but other countries that are, as I mentioned earlier, who are our friends and our allies. Because I really want to see that. I want to make sure that, you know, we have that ability. And, you know, part of our thing we have to do in this country, build more ships. We should be doing that in this country, so we're not relying on somebody else to, you know, to transport. So we need to get, you know, we have to rebuild our shipbuilding area, but at the same time, I see it that we want to get as much LNG overseas as we possibly can, so that they do feel secure, that they do know that in the middle of the winter they're not going to be cut off, or that they're going to be in a situation that they're trading with a country like Russia when it comes to, you know, giving their money to them for the natural gas, that they're going to say that we're being held hostage. And so by having, but that's why I think that when I've talked to Central and Eastern Europeans, they all see us as one thing. They see us as having that ability to help them, and also make sure that they're not helping the Russians. So I don't see that yet.
It's like, is there worry that it's kind of, Europe has been kind of, in the LNG space, famously loath to sign any long-term contracts for U.S. LNG. They'll take short-term contracts, but not long-term contracts. And at the same time, they're pursuing their own kind of their own like homegrown energy policies. As you mentioned, they don't have a lot of oil, they don't have a lot of gas over there, or at least not that it can get to. But they're pursuing like hydrogen, renewables, other kind of like homegrown energy, sources. Do you think at some point there's going to be just less opportunity for U.S. oil and gas producers to export, to Europe?
Good question, because I on a couple of trips over and talking with Europeans, early on, and this is before the invasion in the Ukraine at that time, they all said the same thing. The Russian agents were infiltrating the green groups. We said, we don't want any energy in our country. We think this bad, and so they became totally dependent on the Russians. This is exactly what the Russians wanted to have occur. So I see it that the Europeans still have energy over there, but they're not willing to go out and do what we did. And it's amazing when you talk to people from around the globe. They always ask me, they say, how'd the United States do it? And I said, look, if you put the right laws in place and the right regulations and turn your entrepreneurs and innovators loose, anything can happen. And all of a sudden, we went from being told we had nothing to having plenty. And but they're looking at us now to help them, because they're just not at that point that they're going to be able to get there.
Well, their entrepreneurs might be saying, well, we can't get the oil and gas here, or like in the North Sea, it's depleting. So let's innovate our own, what we can. Like let's do. I think they're big in hydrogen. They're big, in wind. We're seeing. Spain had problems with their renewables with the grid recently, but their aim is to like just do it all for national security reasons too. So I'm kind of wondering, is there a future you see where the U.S. is producing still a lot of oil and gas, but we're not shipping as much as as we're estimating right now, because the demand forecast overseas just doesn't come in?
Well, I think a good example is Germany. They went from, after Fukushima, saying, oh, we're getting away from nuclear, and all of a sudden they swung so far, and now all of a sudden they're trying to bring themselves back, and what are they doing? They're burning coal. So, that's
what the U.S. wants to do. You said we want to bring more coal on.
Well, but, one of the things you can do is you look at the clean coal technologies that are out there today. But for us, we have this, we do. We're so energy rich in this country right now. It's just getting, turning it loose. And, I think it's one of the points also I've heard, because again, we have such broad jurisdiction in energy and commerce. You think of energy, healthcare, telecommunications, which I chaired that subcommittee, and then also our Commerce, Manufacturing, Trade, having chaired that subcommittee. And then the environment. I've never had anybody or heard anybody ever before a committee ever say we're against regulations. Everybody always tells us, just give us regulations we live with. And then that's what turns Americans and entrepreneurs loose in this country.
And let's turn to the appropriations process now. I know that my colleague had mentioned this to your colleague earlier, but with the way that this has turned out, this bill, we've had the House say, if the Senate changes one letter, we're not going to approve their changes. How sensitive do you think the House really is? Like, if the Senate comes back and they say, here are some changes, is it just like dead on arrival, or we got to go through this all over again, or do you think there's actually a little bit of leeway for changes out of the Senate?
Each body's going to produce their own bill.
Yeah,
that's the first thing. We always call it getting jammed by the Senate. That's when they pass something and they leave. So we're sitting there, and so I don't think that's going to happen, because it can't, because there's too many variables in this legislation. You think about the end of the year, you're looking at a $4.5 trillion tax increase if we don't get something done. You look at trying to get the economy moving, because again, having served on the budget committee, I know those numbers that you just don't want to see. Where we are today at a $37 trillion debt with a $1 trillion interest payment, which is just mind-numbing. So, I've never wanted to say that it's dead on arrival when something comes over. Ronald Reagan famously said, "I'd rather get 80% of something and go off the cliff with all flags flying." But in this case, I know the Speaker has been speaking with Senator Thune. He's been speaking with our Republican colleagues in the Senate. Saying what where we are as a House and Republicans in the House. That we just can't back out of, and certain things that they don't have that we have situations with that they might not have any. They don't have a Republican or a Democrat or actually, pardon me, a Republican serving in the Senate from New York or from California. Well, we do. And so, you know, we have a more variety of mix of members across the entire spectrum.
And I'm being told to wrap. I was probably being told to wrap 5 minutes ago, but I'm just seeing it now. Last question. If you knew what if you knew then what you know now, do you think Elon Musk's input into the budgeting process or the reconciliation bill process ultimately helped or hindered this process? Do you think, you know, he should have stayed out of it, or do you think he helped?
Well, and here's going back to my days on the Budget Committee, and also this is my 10th term. We're in trouble, and I think by having his voice also,
Congress, or
well, the country's in trouble, because if you go back to when George H.W. Bush left office, our national debt was about $3.25 trillion, and here we are at $37 trillion. The CBO had said back in 2022 that, or going into 2022, that we paid $272 billion just to pay interest on the debt. When the books closed that year, it was $475. They missed it by $200 billion. The CBO thought that we were going to have a situation with the interest being at over $1 trillion just to pay interest on the debt in 2032. We had it this year. So I think one of the things that really helped point things out is, folks, we are a huge problem out in this country, and we got to get it corrected, and got to get it corrected fast.
all right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.